Hey, happy Halloween. It is pretty much the middle of October right now, and I know usually every year I do the 31 Days of Slashers, and the last couple of years I've been lacking on that a little bit just because I've been really busy working pretty much two jobs, and my daughter now is in Cub Scouts, and there's just a lot of priorities that unfortunately come before making these videos. So, what I thought I would do is just to update you. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to do a straight 31 days of horror reviews. It's just really hard to do. One of the internet personalities that I look up to, James Rolfe at cinemassacre.com, he was kind of finding the same problems with his Monster Madness, which is just a lot of life priorities got in the way, and as you've seen over the years, he stopped doing them. That's the inspiration for 31 DOS for me, obviously. At first I thought there wasn't a lot more that I could really cover, because when I did like the Hellraiser and the Puppet Master reviews a couple years ago, I thought I was kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel. But I realized that there are a ton of horror movies left out there. I just haven't, the ones I've reviewed are pretty much the ones that I've been exposed to. So now it's just about kind of watching new horror movies and just getting a chance to watch, catch up a little bit on a lot of the ones that I haven't caught up on. One of the companies that I've really been interested in looking into is Blumhouse, which I thought for a while they were making maybe lesser quality horror films, for lack of a better word. But I really enjoyed the Paranormal Activity movies, which I've already reviewed. One series that I've kind of been interested in seeing, but I've held off on a while, was The Purge. I finally watched all four Purge movies. So in case you haven't realized, this is me just kind of doing kind of random Spitfire reviews on the horror movies that I've been watching, some classic and some new, and just in one review getting what I've been watching out of the way, just kind of sharing my thoughts on them. So the Purge movies, I held off on watching them for quite a while just because the premise seemed kind of silly. The reviews were, not that that's really important, reviews should never stand in the way of you actually experiencing a movie for yourself. But a lot of people were commenting on how unrealistic this concept of the Purge was and how it would never work. And I think that's really interesting. The Purge movies, at their surface, they are flawed, but they also open up a lot of discussion. Every podcast or conversation brought up about the movies has just stirred hours of conversation about how this would actually work, what the flaws are in the system, how we could do it better if we ever did implement this, these what-if scenarios that sparks a lot of really interesting conversations. The Purge movies, I think it goes without saying, you have to know right off the bat that it's a ridiculous concept, and if you can get past that, I think you'll be able to enjoy the movies that much more. The Purge movies, I thought they were entertaining. I didn't love any of them. If you don't know what the Purge is, I mean, it's in the marketing and any of the trailers, you can pretty much figure it out, but it takes place in America. It's in the near future. I think the first one takes place in 2022, and the government has implemented this thing called the Purge. It's basically one day for 12 hours, all crime, including murder, is legal. And the movies are always about people who get caught up in the Purge. Essentially, you can choose not to participate in the Purge, and it always shows people like locking their doors. Everyone has, especially in the higher class societies, has these big security systems that keep people out. You can choose not to partake in the Purge, but of course the movies always show the characters getting caught like outside or outdoors, not able to get to a safe location, and they're forced to kind of make their way through the night while the Purge is going on, which I think is something that the later movies got into quite a bit, because the first movie was very claustrophobic. It basically takes place in one home. Like I said, these are movies you have to kind of suspend disbelief. You really can't go into them expecting reality. I don't think this system could work. I don't think it's a good idea or anything like that. What I thought was interesting, though, was these movies in particular. I'm not going to cover the TV show because I haven't seen the series. But at least with these movies, they seem to always focus on the murder aspect, which I think is, to me, the most unrealistic reason that why I say the Purge wouldn't work. It plays off of this idea that the purge is there for people who want to release their negative energy and do all these crimes without consequence. But there's all kinds of crimes. I mean, rape to me is pretty much as bad as murder, but there's robbery. I'm surprised that they don't have a heist movie in here somewhere, which I think would be kind of interesting on the purge. But it always seems to be more about just people going out and murdering people. And that's why I would classify these as horror movies. Otherwise, they might be like heist movies. It's kind of interesting because this is one of those few concepts that it doesn't have to be a horror movie. It could be, you could have a heist movie. You could have a suspense movie, all kinds of different things. But it's essentially just murder. And I don't know if people would be that willing to commit murder. Like, to me, if this was real, I'd be out there, like, robbing, like, video game stores and movie stores. That's just me. But the first movie, I don't know a lot of the actors' names. I think Christian Slater is one of them. And basically it follows this family. They're a rich family. The father, who Christian Slater plays, makes a living selling these advanced security systems, as I mentioned. And the family has gotten rich. The mom is actually Cersei from Game of Thrones. I can't think of the actress's name. But and they have 2 kids. They've got the teenage daughter who's seeing this, like, she's got the jock boyfriend that always sneaks in the house. And then you've got the little kid who, the son, who is like kind of like a scientist. He's got this little really crazy robotic security camera thing. It looks really weird, but he can remote control it and kind of have it go around the house and spy on people whenever he wants. So he's like this little spy kid guy, nerdy guy. And of course what happens is during the purge you hear the lockdown and everything starts happening and you think they're safe, but then stuff happens where there's a homeless guy who's yelling for help, and the son, the youngest kid, feels sorry and unlocks the security system for just a few seconds to let this stranger into their homes. And what he doesn't realize that there's this group of purgers that are looking for this guy, and they know now from the neighbors that this family is hiding this homeless guy in their house. So the suspense builds up where these purgers are outside and they're all wearing these weird masks. That part I never really got, because in all these movies, everybody in the purge like wears these masks, and it's never clear what that represents. I've got a few ideas, but basically it's, for like the first half of the movie, it's these guys like threatening to break into the house if they don't give up this stranger, and finally, of course, they do break into the house. My biggest problem with the movie is it's pretty predictable. You pretty much know what's going to happen, and Christian Slater, the father character, is basically a Liam Neeson type. He's the character that, for some reason he knows martial arts and he can defend himself and all these things. So once he gets into the picture, there's really no reason to feel that much of a threat, because he's going to pretty much save the day, although there is kind of a twist at the end, I guess. But yeah, the other problem I had with this movie were the kids, for some reason, weren't very likable. I know they're kids, but the decisions they make, I couldn't really get behind them all the time. The little kid with the remote control camera, they use that quite a bit, and I don't really think it's that effective, and you're always wondering, like, this is not the best time to be using this camera. He does use it to his advantage a few times. But basically, long story short, I thought it was entertaining. It wasn't perfect. It's not something I really want to watch again, or didn't really impact me, but I did think it was kind of entertaining. The ending part, just with the mother, she has a really funny moment. It's really the only funny moment in the film, but I really like it. There's going to be no more killing tonight, that scene. I thought that was pretty funny. Again, there's a twist at the end, but I saw the twist coming from the first scene of the movie, basically. So again, they set it up, but the payoff is kind of weak. The next 3 films, basically they open it up to where it takes place outside in the city streets. So you see more of what's going on, and I like those movies better. The second and third movies, actually all 3 of them, but the last one that just came out, which is called The First Purge, which is confusing, is actually a prequel. So you think of it as like a trilogy. You've got The Purge Anarchy, and The Purge Election Year, and then that's the trilogy, and then there's a story arc there, and then The First Purge is the prequel to this whole trilogy. I'm surprised they didn't do a prequel trilogy to the Purge trilogy. But anyway, Anarchy, essentially, there's these characters, I forget the details, but they get left outside during the purge. Somehow they can't get to safety, and they run into this guy. I think he's a cop or an ex-cop, something like that. He's a rogue, and he's going out. He's got one person that he wants to kill on the purge for revenge, and you find out later in the film, this might be a spoiler, but I think they reveal it pretty early on, that a year ago his son was murdered by a hit-and-run driver, and the hit-and-run driver got off scot-free. So this is the guy that he's looking for the whole film, but as he's going out to get this guy in his home, he runs into these other people that need his help. So again, he's like the Liam Neeson guy. He's the superhero who, that's the biggest problem with this film, is that this cop or renegade, whatever, who's driving around Mad Max style, can pretty much do anything. He's basically bulletproof. And that's the other thing that's really cool about these next two films. The camera shots of him driving around in his car, it feels very much like a Mad Max ripoff, I guess, but I really like the cinematography. A lot of the the villains in these are more memorable. I don't know anyone's names. And again, 2 and 3 kind of merge into each other because the cop in this one becomes the hero in the third one as well. He's the only main character. There's one other one that carries over to the stranger, the homeless guy from the first movie. Apparently he's in the next two as well. I couldn't point him out. But yeah, it's a fun adventure kind of horror thriller movie. Again, it's got a nice little twist ending that was entertaining. I like this one better because, again, it opens things up, and I think as a trilogy goes on, it opens more things up, and what's at stake is higher, I think, especially in the third movie. So this one was pretty good. I enjoyed it. Then we get into the Purge election year, and essentially what's going on is the renegade guy from the second film. I can't really tell where in the timeline this movie takes place because the first two are very close together. But the third one, I think, takes place like 10 years later or something, even though no one looks older. But basically, there's this politician, I think she's a governor, who's running for president, and she firmly believes that the purge is a bad thing, and pretty much a lot of the U.S. is starting to really not like the purge and is against the purge for what it represents. Basically, you find out pretty much in the first movie, but they pretty much confirm it in the second movie, that the purge is basically propaganda for the government to get rid of all the poor people so that the rich people can thrive. That's the reason for the purge, and that's why I think it's in the second film. It might be in this film where, like, you see government officials actually going out and killing people, basically homeless people, in the name of the purge. So the purge is basically this whole like illusion done by the government. So in this one, you've got this governor who wants to become president, and she's going to end the purge as soon as she gets into office. But in the last two films, there was this rule where you couldn't kill certain government officials. In this one, they retract that law so that they can actually go out and try to kill this person before she gets elected. So there's more at stake at this one. It's very similar to Anarchy. I liked it about as much. It has Bubba from Forrest Gump, and I thought he was great in this film. There's a scene with these girls who, like, they try to steal a candy bar at the beginning, and it's the guy who plays Bubba, Mikkel, I can't think of his name. I loved him in this movie, but it's his candy store, and he tells them right away, he stops them from stealing. So later in the film, obviously, they come to try to kill him for that. It's kind of petty. I hate the girls in this, but they get what's coming to them, I'll say. Ultimately, it feels kind of like the Hunger Games, where in the Hunger Games, the whole point was you had Katniss trying to stop the Hunger Games, which was this whole government kind of issued thing. And the Purge kind of feels like the same way. They're just trying to stop the Purge because it's this government-sanctioned illusion that people are sick of all of a sudden. So basically, the first three movies are pretty good. The first Purge follows pretty much the same formula. It takes place in one city, because in the first Purge, they hadn't made it a national thing yet, so they tried out in one city. But the problem with it is, you would think it would be smaller in scope, but in the second and the third movies, they take place in one city as well. Even though it takes place across the nation, you wouldn't really know any better, because it takes place to one city. So I don't know really what the purpose of that was. I guess as a prequel, it felt just like any other movie, aside from the fact that this was the first time that they're implementing it. I don't remember a lot about it. It was kind of entertaining. There was one guy in it who's real crazy from the start, and you know he's going to be like a problem throughout the film. I like that guy. Aside from that, it was okay. So the Purge movies, a lot of fun. Stupid popcorn movies, but again, they open up a lot of discussion for whether or not this would work. And there's a lot of cool ideas within the Purge. I think that was one of the criticisms with it as they were coming out was they don't really. They're ambitious movies, but they don't get to their full potential because they're trying to get you into this like horror movie headspace. And there's a lot there, I think, that you could expand upon. And I don't know if the series is doing that, although I'm hearing that the series is not really going beyond these kind of horror movie cliches. So they were all right. The next one I saw was this movie called It's Alive. It's not a Frankenstein tie-in, but basically, It's Alive is about this mutant killer baby that kills people. I'm not kidding. It came out in the late 70s, I believe. It's the first in a trilogy. The second one, it's called It Lives Again. And the third one was called Island of the Alive. I haven't seen those two. I remember seeing these the first one at least as a kid. I taped them all on TV because they ran them all in a marathon, and I never actually sat and watched all of them. I watched parts of the first one, so I remember parts of it. And, it's a slugfest. This was a kind of a chore, but essentially there's this couple, the wife is pregnant, so it starts off with them going to the hospital, and it's really drawn out. And for someone who's pregnant, she's real laid back, and they wake up their kid. They have a son that they wake up, and then they spend time taking him to the neighbor's house. And then, they go to the hospital, and she gives birth, and then they come in the room, and all the doctors are dead, and you find out, it's pretty easy to find out, the baby that she gave birth to is killing people, although they try to play it off like somebody came in and stole the baby and killed everybody, but it's pretty obvious what's going on. And the only interesting thing in this film is the mother is, of course, she's got this maternal instinct. She wants to find the baby and continue to raise it. The father character, the dad, basically wants nothing to do with the baby, denies it's his, and actually tries to go out to kill the baby. And it's really weird, too, because, basically the next day, it's all over the news. You would think it would take a couple of days, at least, for this to really get out there. But, the second day, everybody knows, here's the family that had that freak baby, and stay away from them. They show, of course, they don't show a lot of the baby, but when they do, it's okay, I guess, for the 70s. He's got, the teeth and the claws and all this stuff. It kind of reminds me of the Freddy baby from Nightmare on Elm Street 5. The thing is, I don't know how long this movie was, but it felt really, really long. So, kind of a snore fest. Very boring movie. There is some gore, but it's very cheesy, and it's a very dated movie. So, I don't know. I did, of course, do a review separately of the 2018 Leatherface movie. Again, didn't love it. I thought it was incredibly entertaining. I don't think it does a good job of really building the mythology, but of all of the prequels, I think it was the most interesting. It just steals from every horror movie, science fiction movie that I can think of, basically. I don't know, there are scenes in that movie where, again, see my full review. I'm not trying to do a full review of it, but there are scenes of it where it's clear that they're trying to pay homage to the Tobe Hooper original film, and it just kind of makes you want to watch that original film. Not a bad horror movie, not terrible. I probably liked it better than the Chucky movie that came out last year. But I'm going to end off here with the Universal Frankenstein movies. These are movies that I've seen in the last couple of years. Growing up, of course, I knew who Frankenstein was. Of course, back then, everybody thought Frankenstein was the monster because you look at, Frankenberry cereal, and who's on the cover? It's the Frankenstein monster, so why wouldn't we think that? But I went out recently and I bought the Frankenstein Legacy Collection on Blu-ray, and I believe this is the first time that all 8 movies are in one collection. So I started watching those, and I watched the first one, The Bride of Frankenstein, and The Son of Frankenstein, so I've got 5 more left to go. But, I didn't watch these movies as a kid because, of course, I was into 80s slasher movies. That's what was coming out at the time. And I was one of those dumb kids who was like, black and white, forget that. And, Frankenstein, those movies aren't scary, they're old. But there's something to say about the way they were filmed, A lot of the scenery, the black and white helps those films tremendously. Like, I just can't imagine watching those movies any other way. The first Frankenstein is just a classic. It's one of those movies I don't love. I enjoy it. It's not a long movie, but it is kind of slow paced. But I appreciate the hell out of it for just the directing. I love Boris Karloff as the monster. Victor Frankenstein is that. His "I'm alive" speech is amazing and very iconic. I love all the things with the lightning. The scene where they actually bring the monster to life is awesome. I love that scene. I love a lot of things about this movie. It does kind of feel like it's missing a middle act, because the whole first act is them, bringing the monster to life. And then when he comes to life, you don't see him that much. And then he gets out, and then it pretty much, the middle act is really very, very condensed. And then the last act is the villagers coming after the monster with the torches, which is, again, a very iconic scene. So it's a little unbalanced in that way, but it's really an awesome movie. I mean, I really enjoyed it. Again, the only thing is it's a little slow paced, but it's not very long, so I can kind of forgive it for that. And I can really see how in, I think, 1931, when it came out, how it would have shocked audiences. The scene where he kills a little girl, and at this point, I don't think I'm spoiling anything. It's almost a 100-year-old movie if you really think about it. But the scene where the dad is carrying her body through the city, and it's this long tracking shot, and all the villagers are kind of partying and having fun, and then when they see this father coming through the village carrying this little girl in broad daylight, they all kind of stop, and the noise kind of comes down to a halt. Very effective scene. So there's a lot I really enjoy about this. Bride of Frankenstein, I legitimately really enjoy. I think it's a great sequel. They inject a lot of humor, so it's kind of got a different tone. I don't even know if the monster really kills a lot in this movie. Boris Karloff is back. I love how he starts to speak, and you see the evolution of his speech to, at the end of the movie, he almost can have a full conversation with Frankenstein. I love a lot of the emotional scenes, the scene with the monster and the blind man. Love that stuff, and how he becomes a very kind of tragic character. And I love the look of the bride when she comes to life and she has these really like bird-like motions. I love that. I also love the book ending of the film where it's Mary Shelley kind of retelling what happened in the first movie. So there's this very short recap, which you see a lot in like 80s slasher movies like Friday the 13th. But here I thought it was really effective, and I loved how it takes place pretty much right after the first movie. So kind of like Halloween 1 and 2, you can think of this as like brother and sister film. I just love this movie a lot. The look, the effects are great with the little tiny people. Dr. Pretorius is a great villain. I love everything about this movie. The third movie, Son of Frankenstein, for some reason I thought this was the one where I think it was Lon Chaney who played the monster in later movies. I thought this was the first one where that happened, but it's Boris Karloff again. This one was a lot slower. It takes place quite a few years after the first two films, and like the title, it follows the son of Victor Frankenstein. Frankenstein at this moment, I think, has passed away, so he's passed on his castle and all of his scientific teachings to his son, who comes back to the city of Frankenstein, where the first two movies took place, and the villagers right away, they don't want him in their town. They think he's a bad thing, and because of everything that happened with the monster and the murders, that they basically just are really upset that he's there, and there's this police officer that's trying to protect him. But then you've got this character named Igor who's got this broken neck, and what happens is, in the past, he was hung for stealing dead bodies, and there was this jury of 8 people that were responsible for the hanging, for convicting him. So you find out that years later, even though his neck is broken, he survived. He was pronounced dead. Somehow he came back to life, or he wasn't actually dead. You see where his neck was broken. It's this really great makeup. So basically, he somehow awakens the monster, which is played by Boris Karloff, and he sends the monster out to kill these jurors for revenge. So it's a revenge story, but it kind of feels like a subplot, because at the same time, Igor gets a hold of the Son of Frankenstein. I can't think of his name, the character's name, but he finds the monster, and this is the first time he's actually seeing the monster, and Igor kind of partners with him to try and get the monster to wake back up because he's been asleep for so long, for like the past 10 years or whatever. And as the monster goes out and starts killing more victims, Frankenstein gets, guilt, there's a guilt trip, and the cop comes in and they're trying to figure out who's doing all these murders. At one time, he's Frankenstein becomes a suspect. It's a slower movie. I do like some of the kills in this. The monster goes out, and some of the kills are kind of brutal, obviously. There's no blood. They don't show a lot, but there's one where he strangles, one of the jurors is riding a horse, and he strangles the guy, just lifts him right off the horse and strangles him, and then he has the horse carriage back up and run over the guy, and they cut away, so you don't actually see it happening, but for like the 30s when this came out, it was... I can't imagine what audiences would have thought of it. The one thing I don't really like about it is the monster is back to not talking, which I was disappointed by because I would have really liked to see him become even more articulate and, articulate his feelings to Frankenstein. There's one interesting scene where the monster and Frankenstein are looking at each other in a mirror, and the monster is kind of forcing Frankenstein to look at himself in the mirror. And Boris Karloff does a lot with his face in this movie, and he acts a lot with his face, which might be a good reason why they didn't have him talk, but I still would have preferred it if they kind of furthered that idea. It does, again, it is a continuation of the third film, even though it takes place like 2 decades later. They bring up the fact that it was really Fritz from the first movie. It was his fault that the monster went on a rampage, because that whole thing where he mixed up the brains and gave the monster the criminal brain, so they bring that into play. So it's a very close... It's closely tied to that first film again, and the cinematography in this is amazing. The castle where Frankenstein and his family live, the shadows and the depth of field, how they shoot a lot of these rooms and dungeons, it's really cool. The climax also is really cool. It reminds me of this like B-movie feel where Frankenstein swings in on this rope and kicks the monster and has him land into this liquid sulfur, and you see him melting away like Terminator and Terminator 2. And the effect there for the 30s I thought was really cool. So I liked it. Not as much as the first 2 movies, but I'd recommend these first 3 at least are amazing. So that's it. That's kind of my big Halloween multi-movie review. I know it's not the same as having a movie out every day, but again, it was just easier to watch these in rapid succession, kind of jot down my thoughts and do this kind of impromptu style video. So, I hope you enjoyed. Keep watching for more. Hopefully I can do at least 1 or 2 more of these before Halloween. And happy October. Happy fall.